Hi, I'm Conrad, and welcome to this Greenhouse Learning presentation on a little guide to SEN tutoring. This is the first session in a series of SEN tutoring, and this one will just act as a bit of an overview to the other sessions just to get you started. So in these sessions, we will look at a general introduction and look at some different SENs and the ones that are most commonly you come across in your tutoring. Advice on SEN tutoring, so kind of like how to approach different SEN needs, how to plan, and then your role as an SEN tutor. So what you're trying to achieve by this, because it can be slightly different to normal tutoring where you have a very fixed goal, and it can be a little bit more open and up to you about where you want the sessions to go. And then about feeling good with your SEN tutoring, because especially if it's your first time or you haven't done much previous work with SEN children, it can be a little bit challenging and a little bit daunting, but we'll just make sure that you feel comfortable. So in this session, we are going to look at different types of SEN, so the main types of SEN that you'll come across in tutoring, how each one of those affects learning, how to approach SEN tutoring, and catering to individual needs. So that last one is probably the most important one, which we'll talk about a lot in later in this session. So different types of SEN. So I selected the four most common ones that you'll probably come across when tutoring. So dyslexia, it's very common. ADHD, which is the most common SEN in children. ASD, and cognitive developmental delay. So those last three are probably the most broad in terms of SEN, and it can have a whole different effect on children and how you have to approach the sessions. So dyslexia. So dyslexia is a learning difficulty that affects fluent word reading and spelling. So that is the main common drawback with children with dyslexia, is that their reading and writing will be a lot more below than other children. So when you're approaching this in a tutoring point of view, you've got to really take that into account. It also affects your short-term memory. So again, when you're planning your lessons or when you're working with children with dyslexia, you need to make sure that you're catering to that, and you'll make sure the lessons aren't based with their short-term memory being active most of the time. It also affects areas beyond physical learning, such as disorganization and not knowing your left and right and all stuff like that. So it can have a whole effect on your mental side, as well as your ability to read and write. But also with dyslexia, there are a number of benefits that students have. They can be a lot more creative, and it can also give them a lot better long-term memory as well. So when you're doing your tutoring, dyslexia students need to get that into account and try and cater your lessons towards those needs. So ADHD is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders. It involves impulsive behaviors, trouble concentrating, and overly active in children. Again, this can affect children in a variety of different ways, so you need to make sure that you're planning your lessons based on the children you have, but also keep all these into account, because there will be common themes that run through ADHD. So when you're having your lessons with children with ADHD, try and make them a bit more active. Try not to get them sitting down, have lots of breaks. But again, we'll talk about this in future sessions. So ASD is a wide spectrum with a big variety of needs. So this is one where we'll talk a lot more in the future sessions, because it's just a bit too broad to cover in this short introductory video. But ADHD affects social, communication, and cognitive development. So when you're working with children, you need to keep all those three major areas in mind. And again, it can affect children differently. But if they have communication problems, then you need to be catering for that and making sure the lesson isn't, talk-based. And same with social and cognitive, you need to be catering the sessions to those. There's a big array of learning styles. So each child with ASD can learn differently. And like I said, there's a bit too much to cover now, so we'll talk about more in future sessions. So cognitive developmental delay is a very broad meaning, and it essentially breaks down to any condition which affects physical or mental uh, cognitive development. So this can look very different in lots of students. So again, this is a bit too broad to cover now, and we'll cover it more into future sessions, but it affects their ability to think and reason, and it also means that they will also have many different ways of learning. So it's about approaching each child differently, but bearing in mind their SEN. So how to approach SEN learning. So the most important thing that I think is to trust your skills, stay calm, kind, and empathetic. SEN learning isn't too much different to tutoring children without SEN, but I think for a lot of people who haven't experienced SEN tutoring, it can be a lot more frustrating, and you just need to understand why your child may not understand something, and to use your skills to be able to explain it in a variety of different ways, and just keep in mind why they might not be understanding it, and being able to get the best out of your student. So you really need to be monitoring your student on how they are working things out, how they are learning, how they are communicating, and fit your style of tutoring into that student to be able for them to work the best. Also, developing your understanding of different SEN. So if you have a child with dyslexia, then I really recommend going out and just learning as much as you can just to help them. These sessions will cover a lot about dyslexia and how to tutor it, but you can always benefit from learning on your own time. Know how to deal with different situations. So this implies more to more severe cases with children with SEN, such as people with cognitive development delay and autism, where they might get upset. And then it's about controlling those situations and being able to realize what caused that, understand their different triggers, and try and not include them in sessions. But again, when we talk about ASD, we'll talk about that in more detail. Also, be mindful and sensitive to the bigger picture. So kids with dyslexia and kids with ADHD, they might be a bit sensitive to the fact that they've been diagnosed with those conditions. And they might be, in some cases, a little bit embarrassed by it. So it's about being sensitive and calm around them and making them not feel alienated for having those. And also kids with more severe autism and cognitive development delay, it can be a very sensitive situation for the whole family. So if you're coming into a household to do tutoring, just always keep that in mind and try and be as approachable and as friendly as possible, and try and show the family what you're doing and how you're trying to help and how you're trying to steer the tutoring, because they would find that a massive benefit if they can see the benefits as well. So catering to individual needs. So being able to assess your students is a massive part of SEN tutoring, as, like I said earlier in the video, it might not have the same structure as tutoring children without SEN, as you might have to be deciding what the goals of the sessions are, because if they're not working for GCSEs or A levels, then you need to be finding goals for those children to reach and being able to assess them. And then again, I explained this earlier in understanding how they work. I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind, because not one size fits all with this. You need to be changing your strategy to every single child you have. Using tests and interventions. I'm going to make a separate video on how to use interventions, different interventions you can use. But with children with ASD and cognitive development delay, they are a great tool to incorporate breaks while also working on areas which aren't your classic maths, literacy, and science, working on those cognitive developments and those social developments using interventions. And it also is a fun little break for the students. And building a good relationship, I think that doesn't really need to be said, but I'll put it in anyway. Having your student be able to trust you and being able to work with them, that's going to be massive when it comes to SEN tutoring, especially with more severe ones, because they can always be a bit wary at the start, especially if they have some social cognitive issues, and building a good relationship with them will massively improve the work. Right, thank you very much for watching, and the next video will be on dyslexia.